Hi, Vikings fans. We spend a lot of time talking about the Norse gods and their fantastic adventures, but they aren't always the most interesting characters in the stories that survive from Norse mythology. Today, we are talking about some of the other fantastic and sometimes downright terrifying creatures that feature in Norse myth and legend. We have come up with a list of the 15 most interesting, terrifying, and sometimes amusing monsters that appear in Norse mythology. So keep watching. For even more information, check out the full article on our website, vkngjewelry.com. Number 1. Jotnar. Any list of Norse monsters needs to start with the Jotnar, the giants of Scandinavian legend. These giants were not the beings of immense size that we imagine today, but they were a force for chaos and evil in the universe. Their name means devourers, pointing to their ability to destroy. The Jotnar were in fact very similar to the Norse gods. They were superhuman beings with immense and varying powers. But unlike the gods that used their powers to create and protect the universe, the Jotnar created chaos. They were also sworn enemies of the Norse gods and often attacked them and created trouble for them. Though that didn't stop a significant amount of intermarriage between the gods and the giants. Thor himself was the son of the god Odin and the giantess Jord, and then had his own giantess mistress Jarnsaxa, with whom he had 2 sons of his own. There were various different types of giants, for example, frost, fire, and earth giants. After the world was created, the fire giants were trapped in their own volcanic world of Muspelheim. Though, when the world comes to an end during Ragnarok, they will escape this world and bring destruction to the rest of the universe. The giants that appear most commonly in Norse stories as troublemakers are the frost giants. The most famous of these, of course, was Loki, who was almost always at the center of whatever trouble the Norse gods found themselves in. Number 2. Trolls. One of the most well-known monsters from Norse mythology are probably the trolls, as they are often described as responsible for various rock formations that characterize the Scandinavian landscape. This is because the Vikings believed that when exposed to sunlight, trolls turned to stone. Trolls were thought of as dwelling on the fringes of the world, in darkness and in isolated places, such as forests, mountains, or caverns. They were sometimes described as ugly, slow, and dim-witted, but on other occasions they are described as barely indistinguishable from humans. Some stories associate the trolls with the giants, and were therefore clearly a threatening force within Norse beliefs. But they only really became figures of menace in the Christian period, when they are described as heathens without knowledge of Christianity. In that way, they were again outsiders living on the fringe that posed a significant threat to an ordered society. Number 3. Norns. While the Norns should not be described as monsters, they certainly had the power to strike fear into the hearts of some men. The Norns were the fates of the Norse mythology, and they were blind and implacable when it came to their work casting the destiny of men. There is no way to appeal to fate or fight fate. It simply must be lived. While the Vikings may have had an idea that a Norn was associated with every living being from the moment of their birth, there were 3 primary Norns that were the overreaching goddesses of destiny. They lived at the roots of the Yggdrasil, the tree of life in which the Norse universe existed. They watered the roots of the tree to ensure that they did not rot, and they also carved the fates of men into her bark using runes, making destiny solid. Number 4. Ratatoskr. Another creature that dwelled in the roots and branches of Yggdrasil was Ratatoskr, a squirrel. He runs up and down the tree of life, carrying messages between a wise eagle that lives in the highest branches of the tree and a hungry dragon that dwells in Yggdrasil's roots. But this rat is a mischievous troublemaker and is always relaying his messages in such a way that it causes animosity between the eagle and the dragon, often leading to conflict, perhaps with the sinister intention of destroying the tree that holds the universe together. He is also sometimes described as malevolently gnawing away at the bark of Yggdrasil. Number 5. Mare. The Mare were monsters in Norse mythology, responsible for giving men bad dreams. They would enter people's homes at night and sit on their chests as they slept, feeding them nightmares. You would know that you had been visited by a mare, as whenever they touched a living thing, such as a human or cattle, they would cause their hair to become entangled. The Vikings believed that the Mare were living people whose souls left their bodies at night to torture others. These people were often considered to be witches, who undertook this act for malicious purposes. But a person could also unwittingly become a mare. This was particularly common among adolescents who had less control over their spirits. The idea of the soul wandering from the body was a common thing among the Vikings and not limited to the mare. Odin's soul wandered so often that he often worried that it would simply never return to his body. Number 6. Kraken. Release the Kraken! Kraken were aquatic monsters that lived off the shores of Norway and Greenland in the icy waters that the Vikings regularly navigated in their longships. They are usually depicted as giant octopi or squids, and in some stories they are described as so large that their bodies can be mistaken for small islands. Men who set foot on these Kraken islands were always devoured. The Kraken would often attack ships at sea, rising to the surface in giant whirlpools that threw the craft and crew off balance before the attack. But the Kraken actually mostly ate fish. They would attract fish to wherever they were with their excrement. It was so thick and smelly and so strong that it called other fish to them looking for food, where they, too, would be eaten. Number 7. Jormungandr. An even more terrifying sea creature from Norse mythology is Jormungandr, also known as the Midgard serpent. He is one of 3 children of the giant couple Loki and Angerboda. After these children were born, the Norse gods were so terrified of the evil of such a coupling that they placed each of the pair's children in a place where they could do the least harm. In the case of Jormungandr, they threw the serpent into the waters that surround Midgard, separating it and protecting it from the other worlds. There, the serpent grew to such an enormous size that it could encircle the entire world and hold its own tail in its mouth. While Jormungandr is always described as a threatening force to sailors who stray too far from shore, he is mainly feared as the nemesis of the god Thor. According to the prophecy of Ragnarok, the Norse end of the world, during the final battle, Jormungandr and Thor will fight to the death. While Thor will slay the serpent with his hammer, the Midgard serpent will spew so much of his venom onto Thor that the god too will die. He will also release so much of his venom into the air that he poisons all the worlds of the Norse cosmos. Number 8. Fenrir. Another child of Loki and Angerboda was Fenrir, an enormous and mighty wolf. The gods so feared Fenrir that they decided to chain him up, but he was too strong to be bound by normal means. The gods initially tried to bind the wolf with chains that they had made themselves, fooling the proud creature into putting the chains on voluntarily as a test of his strength. Fenrir easily broke the bonds. After a second failed attempt, the gods approached the dwarves, the master craftsmen of Norse mythology, to make a chain that could not be broken. What they produced in the end looked like a ribbon, but was unbreakable. Fenrir was understandably suspicious when the gods asked him to try such a flimsy chain, so he agreed only on the condition that one of the gods put their hand in his mouth as a sign of good faith. Knowing the plan, the gods were unwilling to do this, and in the end, only the god Tyr, who was friendly with Fenrir, had the courage to do so. When Fenrir donned the chain and found himself trapped, he bit off Tyr's hand. Once Fenrir was imprisoned, the gods wedged a sword into his mouth to stop his howling. As a result, he drooled so much that he created a foamy river that became known by the name Expectation. When the end of the world comes with Ragnarok, Fenrir will break his chains and will run through the world, devouring everything before him with his open mouth. This will even include the king of the gods, Odin, whom Fenrir will devour in the final battle at the end of the world. Number 9. Sleipnir. Sleipnir is yet another child of Loki, but not with the Angerboda. Loki is in fact the mother of Sleipnir, an 8-legged horse that could run faster than any animal and could move freely between the 9 worlds that made up the Norse cosmos. As a result of Loki's interference, the gods were at risk of losing the goddess Freya, as well as the sun and the moon, to a builder who was constructing the fortifications of Asgard. In order to stop the builder from fulfilling his pledge to complete the walls of the city in a single season, and therefore gaining his prize, Loki, who was a shapeshifter, turned himself into a stunning mare in order to distract the builder's steed, Svaldafari, that was helping him complete his work. Loki managed to sabotage the builder, but also found himself pregnant with Sleipnir. Loki gave Sleipnir to Odin to act as his steed. Number 10. Huldra. The Huldra are wardens of the forest, part of a group of Ra that protect various different natural locations in the Norse world. The female Huldra are always described as incredibly beautiful and seductive, but with the long tail of a cow and their back covered in bark. Female Huldra would wander the world, enchanting men in order to lure away young men and keep them as slaves or lovers, or sometimes just suck the life out of them. If one of their captives escaped, they would still forever live with pangs of longing to return to their Huldra captor. Their illusion was only broken if someone was to see their tail. Number 11. Fossagrimin. The Fossagrim, also known simply as the Grim, is a water spirit and musician. He plays the fiddle with such incredible talent that he can mimic the sounds of the forest, wind, and water. This spirit can be induced to teach the skill or playing. He usually requires an offering, perhaps a white goat thrown with its head turned away into a waterfall that flows northward, or smoked mutton stolen from the neighbor's storehouse 4 Thursdays in a row. If there's not enough meat on the bone, the Grim will only teach the supplicant how to tune the fiddle. If the offering is deemed sufficient, he will take the pupil's right hand and draw them along the strings until they bleed. Number 12. Dwarfs. There are 2 different types of elves in Norse mythology: the Dakelfar, or dark elves, and the Josulfar, or light elves. Dark elves were largely synonymous with dwarves, master craftsmen that preferred to live underground in forges. They fashioned all of the most important objects that appear in Norse mythology, including Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and Odin's spear, Gungnir. The dwarves often imbued their creations with magical properties by using special ingredients. For example, 2 dwarves slew Kvasir, the most intelligent person ever to have existed, in order to create the mead of poetry, which, when drunk, gave a person complete mastery of the spoken language. Far from being described as bearded men of modest stature, they are described as being black in color and almost impossible to see in the dark. Number 13. Elves. In contrast to their dwarven cousins, the light elves are described as beautiful to behold, as beautiful as the sun. They were often described alongside the gods Aesir and Vanir, and may have been much like them. But unlike the Aesir, they do not seem to have been occupied with humans. However, they are occasionally described as mating with humans, resulting in humans with elven blood that are always the most beautiful people to behold. Number 14. Draugr. No list of monsters would be complete without the undead, popular stars from many of our horror films. The Draugr are the undead of Norse mythology. While they are sometimes described as drinking blood, they're more like zombies than vampires. The Draugr possesses superhuman strength and can increase their size at will, but they cannot shake the unmistakable stench of decay and have the hideous visage of a dead body. They often live in their graves in order to defend the treasure that they were buried with, but they're also known to enter communities in order to wreak havoc on the living, often tormenting those who wronged them in life. They can kill by crushing someone with their superior strength, eating their flesh, or killing indirectly by driving a person mad. They were said to be able to enter the dreams of the living in order to torment them, but always leave behind a gift to show the victim that the encounter was real. The Draugr can be killed and suffer a second death if they are burned, dismembered, or otherwise destroyed. It was believed that evil, greedy, or unpopular people were most likely to become Draugr after death. Number 15. Valkyries. The Valkyrie were elegant, noble maiden warrior spirits that served Odin and took the souls of dead warriors to live in Valhalla. This was a hall of Odin in Asgard where the honorable dead were invited to live until Ragnarok, when they would be called on again to fight alongside the gods in the final battle. The word Valkyrie means chooser of the slain, and they were sometimes considered not only to transport dead spirits, but decide who lives and dies on the battlefield. In some stories, they use their malicious magic in order to ensure their preferences. Want to know more about these creatures or any of the other fantastic beasts and characters that appear in Norse mythology? Check out our website, bkngjewelry.com, for articles about this and other stories. Here you'll also find amazing jewelry inspired by real Viking jewelry and Norse legendary themes. including the likes of Fenrir and Jormungandr. They're a great way to show your passion and knowledge of the Viking way of life. If you found this video interesting and informative, please like it and follow us for more fascinating films about the history and culture of our Viking ancestors. Before you go, tell us which of these amazing monsters is your favorite and why.